Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. In a landmark decision, the US Supreme Court has banned race-based admissions in colleges and universities, a long-standing precedent that has benefited Black and Latino students in higher education. The Chief Justice said students must be evaluated based on their experiences as an individual and not on the basis of race. The court said admission programs by Harvard and University of North Carolina violated the Equal Protection Clause because they failed to offer measurable objectives to justify the use of race. The court further added that the programs involve racial stereotyping and had no specific endpoint. Joining us now to talk more on the significant ruling, we're joined by Ro Khanna, representative of California, Congress and member of the Democratic Party. We will also be speaking to Ro Khanna about the Prime Minister's visit to the United States and the future of Indo-US ties in defense, critical technology and trade. Mr. Khanna, the Biden administration has condemned the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action. How do you think this will hurt or impact the student community in the United States?
Well, it's a challenge. As a graduate of Yale Law School and the University of Chicago, I benefited from having a very diverse student body, people who were of Asian American background, Indian American background, African American background, Latino background, and of course, white students. And this has prepared me to be a leader representing Silicon Valley in Congress. We would be doing a disservice to our students and educational institutions if we lose that diversity.
How do you think Asian Americans could be impacted by this?
The universities could be impacted, absolutely. I mean, this is going to make it harder for universities, colleges to have the diverse representation. I mean, these institutions are remarkable in getting people from every part of America and having students from different parts of the world. And now it's going to make that a harder challenge for them.
Right. What will be the legal way out of this? How difficult would you think it is to get a legal way out and reverse back to the earlier policy?
Well, Justice Roberts has said that in students' essays, they can refer to their race, they can refer to their background and their hardships and their life experience. So that may be something that the admissions officers can work with. I know university presidents are looking for ways to keep the diversity on their college campuses while complying with the law. And I think in the next 3-4 months, they were going to do a hard work to make sure America doesn't lose this competitive edge of having some of the most diverse colleges and universities in the world.
Right. Congressman Khanna, coming to the Prime Minister's visit last week, he spent a considerable time with American businesses, with President Biden as well. What do you think this visit and the talks between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi do for Indo-US ties going forward?
In strengthening the ties. It was a very successful visit. We had the jet engine deal that was announced to India. India is committed to purchasing a lot of new advanced defense technology from the United States, helping create jobs in the United States, helping bring our countries together. There is technology partnership. I was able to meet with the Prime Minister for about 25 minutes. We had a wide-ranging discussion on the importance of technology, on climate change, on the importance of defense cooperation, on the importance of people-to-people ties. He was well aware of the 5 Indian Americans in Congress, and we discussed pluralism, we discussed human rights. So it was a very constructive few days.
Right. To ask you about the GHL deal, it has been said that US has not transferred this level of technology to any other ally, and this is an unprecedented deal. Will it go through the US Congress easily because it needs an authorization from the US Congress?
I believe it will, and I have led on this as the US Indo co-chair in Congress. Mike Waltz and I have been leading, and I expect that it will go through and we will continue to work for it. I led last year the amendment to make sure India didn't face sanctions, CAATSA sanctions, under the regime that was penalizing anyone that had business relationships with Russia, because I wanted to make sure that the U.S.-India relationship continued to improve. And I think the same coalition that voted for that amendment will vote to approve this.
Right. From you, Congressman Khanna, was there any kind of message also from US politicians, the US government, to the Prime Minister on the Ukraine war? What kind of a role India can play in stopping this war?
That emerged in discussions. I think it was important that the Prime Minister affirmed the principle of sovereignty, that Ukraine's territorial sovereignty matters, that they have to have territorial integrity, and that Russia should not be encroaching on Ukrainian territory. And what the end of the war entails is Russia pulling out of the territories that it invaded illegally. I do think the Prime Minister in India can play a role, hopefully, in bringing us to a just peace.
Right. Also to ask you about the importance of this visit and the relationship with India for President Biden at this juncture and for the United States at a time where it's trying to counter the expansionist, the aggressive economic coercion of China at one hand. It is trying to counter Russia. How significant is the time, the investments U.S. is making in the relationship with India?
It's one of the most important allies for the United States in the 21st century. It's a incredibly important ally. We have, of course, strong people-to-people ties, cultural ties with India that should not be underestimated, and that was on full display with the Prime Minister's visit. But we also have mutual interests. Neither the United States or India wants to see China emerge as a hegemon in Asia with its territorial expansionist ambitions. And the relationship can make sure that no country emerges as a hegemon in Asia, and that we respect the self-determination of all nations in the world.
Right. I would also like to ask you about the unfinished agenda. Do you feel there are certain areas where India can remove barriers or tweak policies in order to gain more investments from the United States, have a bigger presence of the U.S. business community?
Well, I was talking to Tim Cook, Apple CEO. I know they're investing. They're in my district. They're investing in moving from China to India. Some of their supply chain and other companies are looking at the same thing. There is still a fair amount of bureaucratic challenges in doing that. There's less corruption, which has been a positive. But to the extent that that process of allowing companies to move from China to India, to have India emerge as the manufacturing hub of Asia, can be made easier, the more companies like Apple you will see making that move.
Right. My last question, Congressman Khanna, of course, there was a big debate in India. This was about Barack Obama's statements on minority rights in India. How do you see this backlash that came from Indian politicians, the Indian government?
I think what President Obama said was basically U.S. policy. And President Obama, of course, was a very pro-India president. And all he said was that while we have strong relationships with India, while we strengthen that relationship, both countries need to make sure that we are protecting minority rights and pluralism. That is a challenge within the United States. We've had debates about how we strengthen voting rights in America, how we make sure that we don't have police violence against young men of color who are maybe unarmed. It's a challenge for our own nation, and it's a challenge within India. Any nation that is a multi-ethnic society, multiracial society, faces challenges of being a strong liberal democracy. And I think that's all President Obama was saying.
Right. And one more question. We saw at least 8 or 10 deals being signed, predominantly the technology partnership, especially on critical and emerging technologies being lifted to another level. What more investments and what more regulatory changes do you expect that will take place within the U.S. administration to enable more technology transfer to India in the days to come, both through executive actions and through legislative actions, both in defense and in the field of other critical technologies?
Well, I'm leading the amendment with Senator Warner to have India recognized as a major non-NATO ally. Of course, it doesn't make sense to have India in NATO. NATO is largely European, and I don't think India would want to march lockstep with U.S. policy, being an independent nation that has its own geopolitical interests in foreign policy, but they can be a major non-NATO ally. That would facilitate even more sensitive technology and defense cooperation. But apart from that, one of the areas we need to improve is scientific research. The United States has far more joint papers penned with Chinese scientists at the National Science Foundation than with Indian scientists and Indian researchers. Now, part of that is a lot of the Indian researchers and scientists are now in the United States or in Europe because of the diaspora. But there's still a lot of brilliant people within India, of course, and we need to facilitate more of that cooperation.
All right. Congressman Khanna, thank you so much for joining us here on Global Eye, giving us your view on the Indo-US relationship going forward and what are some of the unfinished agenda that India needs to work on in order to gain more investments from US companies. Thanks once again for being with us.
Thank you very much.
On that note, we take a short break here on Global Eye, but don't go anywhere. When we return, we'll get you an exclusive interview with the World Bank Country Director on the investment, the funding that has been announced by the World Bank for India's renewable energy transition.